having the proper regulation of each of those roles is also very important, because say, okay, I know what my role is. My role is a husband or a wife, or my role is that of a child in the family. That's fine, but if you don't understand that, yeah, there actually are even boundaries to those roles, then the whole family as a whole can be in trouble. Last week we talked about the first aspect of this regulation of the home, that's ethereal or spiritual. I can just imagine my wife being there with me all day. And now, let me say, my office is at the house. She's with me all day. It's fine. We don't have that problem. But I can see that, going to a secular type job, and here you are, you're working for your boss, but your spouse is there. You feel like you're working for them too. At the same time, that just wouldn't work. I understand we are different people. Men and women are different. Husband and wife, they're different. But the thing is, God put us together as one. And so we have to put aside the yours and mine aspect when it comes to our money. We have to set that aside and recognize, wait a minute, if we're one, then the money that I make, the money you make, that's our money, because we are one before God. We have to come to it from that point. Anyway, we ended up here on page 37, talking about the Bible has much to say about finances. And we're not going to go through everything the Bible has to say about finances. That's not the point of the lesson. We're just sort of skimming over and just kind of getting a little bit of a taste. If you want to know a little more about finances, read through Proverbs, read through Ecclesiastes. You'll find a lot about finances, about how to take care of finances, and so on. But here, Proverbs 23 and verse number 5, here we find that your finances are not to be the focus and priority of your life. You should not be living to make money, or living to spend money for that matter either. Finances, the getting, the gaining, the keeping, or the spending of it ought not be the focus of our lives. Proverbs 23 verse number 5 says this, wilt thou set thine eye upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. And I've seen people that they've worked very hard to get ahead in the world. And they worked very hard their whole life. And they haven't quite got enough to get buried in when they're done. When life's over. I mean, that's their goal. The goal is to make lots of money, but they don't ever seem to get there. And is that to say nobody's rich? Well, of course, we know that there are rich people in the world. And we know that that's a fact. But you know what? For us to have as our goal to be like those people, is that really where we want to be? With the life choices that they've made? With the children that they've raised? With the families that they have? Or the lack thereof? Because that's what happens a lot of times when you're rich. You don't have a family. Because you spend all your time trying to make money and to keep what you've made. You don't have time for people. And then when you get old, you may have money, but you've got nobody. And that's a lonely life. I'd much rather be poor. It's a good thing. But I'd much rather not have a lot of money and have people than I would to have money and no real friendship and not know what love's all about. Much rather. And I've seen this on a personal basis, where my great aunt, that would be my grandmother's sister, and her husband, they lived in Kansas City, Kansas, or Missouri, one or the other. Doesn't matter. One's a stone throw from the other. But they lived there in Kansas City their whole married life, and he was not well off. He was filthy rich. He owned a chemical company, and he made bukus of money. And it showed. I mean, I never knew him. Whenever I came around, he was gone. But they lived in the nice part of town, and they had a real nice house and nice stuff in it. It's one of those you walk around the house with your hands in your pockets. You know what I'm talking about? You don't dare have your hands outside your pockets for fear you might actually touch something and it fall and break. Because you know you can't afford it, whatever it is. It may be just a duster, but you can't afford the duster. And so, I mean, she had a lot of things, monetary, material things. But let me tell you something, that was one of the loneliest women I'd ever seen in my life. Because everything to her was about money. And how sad. And what's sad about it is when you have a husband and wife that are both that way. Because then they don't have time for each other. All they've got time for is to chase after money. Well, fine. You know, when you eventually go broke because you can't chase any faster, you're going to be stuck with him or her that you didn't have time for. And that's not a good place to be in, because him or her are going to feel neglected because you didn't have time for him or her when you were chasing after money. Does this make any sense? It's true. Again, I've seen it over and over and over. Over in Matthew chapter 6, we see that your financial priorities show where is your heart. Where's your heart? Oh, I have a heart for God. That'll show. You know, what you think about money will show where your heart is. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 6:21. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth, I'm trying to put those two words together, moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So, you know, if it's all about the getting of goods and the gaining of things and money and material goods, that shows where your heart is. We just back in the summer, September, I was able to buy my truck. Well, the bank and I bought it. You know, you understand what I mean. The bank actually owns it. I rent it from the bank on the monthly basis. But anyway, I noticed yesterday, we'd been driving around and we got home. I noticed on the wheel well in the back driver's side, somebody had scratched, not just smudged, they had scratched that whole casing around the wheel well. Didn't really please me a whole lot. But you know what? I've seen people throw fits over stuff like that. They get a scratch in the paint on their vehicle, and you'd have thought somebody had threatened their life the way that they respond to that. And why? Because that's where their heart is. And it's not that I am not saying line up and scratch up my truck after service. Because, you know, that won't fly either. But I'm saying that those things show where our heart is. And when we're concerned about all that, it shows our heart is not toward God. Our heart is toward the world. Our heart is toward material things. The reality is that as God's people, our finances need to be surrendered to God. Just like every other part of our life, our finances have to be surrendered to God. Malachi chapter 3, verse number 10 says, bringing all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Over in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 and 18, charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Ready to distribute, ready and willing to communicate. You know, there's some people, again, we're talking about Christian people, in the idea that our finances will show where our heart is, but they have the wherewithal to support the work of God. They just aren't going to do it. Then, they're just not willing to do it. And that's what he's saying. Ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Communicate doesn't have to do with talking. In this context, it's talking about willing to give to a need, whatever that need may be. Over in Hebrews chapter 13, and verse number 16. But to do good and to communicate, forget not. For with such sacrifices God is well pleased. So even if God has blessed us with monetary things, we need to be willing to use those things for the Lord, to give those things to God. And so our finances have to be fully surrendered to God. Not, well, once I get X number of dollars, then I'll give my finances to God. And if that's the way we think, it'll never happen, because inflation's a thing. Because even if you get there and say, well, that's not as much as I thought it was, I need to raise the bar because, my money's not worth what it was when I originally set the goal. I didn't realize how little this really was. And so, and that's what happens. You'll never get to that goal, never get to that point. So our finances need to be surrendered to God first, and then God can do whatever he wants. But the wise family will set a budget and update that budget on a consistent basis to properly regulate the family's finances. Again, we're talking about the regulation of the home. So it's not just the making of money, but what do you do with it once you get it? What do you do with it? And we have to be wise. Yes, we can go to a financial advisor. And I'm not saying go, and I'm not saying not. But we can. But the thing is, they've got their own philosophy. They have their own itinerary. They have their own plan for your money. And you know what their first plan is for your money? To pay themselves. That's their first plan. Because you don't go to a financial advisor and they say, well, once we've reached your financial goals, then I'll start taking out. Oh, no. They get theirs on the front end. Before any goals ever appear on the horizon. That's just how they are. And here's the other thing about a financial advisor, just so you know, if you don't already, but that is that they will always resist the idea of faithfully giving to the work of the Lord. A financial advisor will tell you it's unwise to tithe. A financial advisor will tell you it's unwise to give an offering above your tithe to the Lord. But in eternity, I'm not going to stand before a financial advisor. I'm going to stand before the Lord. So I'd much rather do that which is pleasing to the Lord than that which is pleasing to a financial advisor. But that's just, it is what it is. Take it for, what it means. And do what you want. But there are a lot of budgetary plans out there. And I use this one just because it's simple. It's easy to understand. The 50-30-20 plan. You say, well, I don't get it. Well, let's explain. The best way to really go about any sort of budget and any sort of financial planning is, first of all, to calculate your after-tax, after-tithe, and offering income. And what do I mean by that? I mean, after-tax income is what remains of your paycheck after payroll taxes come out. That's where we get in trouble a lot of times. We say, for example, I get paid $15 an hour, and I know that's minimum wage, but I'm just throwing that out there. Oh, I get paid $15 an hour, so I can afford this payment for this car, and I can afford the insurance. And we're not, we don't, when we're young, we just don't think. We're not thinking, oh yeah, they're going to take out taxes before they ever give me anything. And so now all of a sudden we're behind the 8 ball because we've already signed our name on the dotted line that we're going to make that payment. And, we're not bringing home $15 an hour. The government says we are, but what we actually bring home is not $15 an hour. You see what I'm saying? So we have to consider that when we're talking about budget. Also, your after tithe and offering income is what remains of your paycheck after you paid your tithe and offering. So those come out first before you even start adding up all your bills and all the whatnots. So here's the plan. In this plan, 50-30-20. So it's 50%, 30%, 20%, 50% of your available funds go toward your needs. That's your groceries, because we all need groceries. I figured somebody'd say amen. Anyway, I guess I'm on my own with that one. But anyway, groceries, rent or mortgage, utilities, vehicle payment, and insurance, all that should come out of that 50% of our income. And then going on, the 30% of our budget, that is toward wants, that is shopping, dining out, hobbies, etc., etc. Now, what we don't need to do is, like the government. The government says, well, I have so much for my budget for the year, I've got to spend every penny of it. Just because you have 30% set aside toward wants doesn't mean you have to go spend it all. And nobody's nodding their head. They're all like, really? Really? I mean, sort of like, the old saying, we used to say back in the day, I can't be out of money, I still have checks. Now it's, I can't be out of money, I still have a card. That's just how, I was working at Texaco. It was one of my very first jobs. And a gentleman came in with his American Express to pay for his gas. Well, he shouldn't have, because he hadn't paid his bill. And you know how American Express is, you have to pay every 30 days, you have to pay it off. He hadn't paid it off. And so it didn't go through. Finally, the computer told me I had to call in. So I called in, and they asked me all these questions. And the part of what they said is the customer there? Yeah, they're right here in front of me, along with about 75 other people waiting to pay for their stuff. And okay, well, do you have the card in your possession? Yeah, it's in my hand. Do you have any scissors by you nearby? Yeah, I got a pair of scissors right here. And it's okay, take the scissors, cut the card in half. And I kid you not, that customer just about came over the counter. It was interesting. So essentially they told him, you've gone too far, and you will get no more until you pay off your card. But that's what we think sometimes. Well, I've got this 30%, and of course, the way we figure it, if we do, like some of us do, well, I just figure it in my head. That 30% adds up to like 330% of our income. Oh yeah, I've still got money. We're not thinking about all the money we just spent that fits in that category. We have to think about those things. So what I'm saying is 30%, that's for these things, but that doesn't mean it all has to be spent. Because, like for some of your hobbies are expensive, right? And so you're not going to spend every penny that comes in. Part of that 30% you're going to set aside into savings till you get enough where you can pay for whatever it is that your hobby is. And you can go along with that. And then going down to the 20%, that's the last. 20% of your available funds should go towards savings. And of course that can be divided into all sorts of different areas. You can save toward large purchases, furniture or whatever. You can save toward emergencies, because emergencies always come when you're least financially ready for those. That's why they're called emergencies. And so children's future education, if you want to put aside for that, and family vacations, whatever. So you can divide it in a lot of different ways. I think the emergency fund is the first thing that you need to save up and have a set amount set aside for emergencies. That's just, again, that's my opinion. Is it anywhere in the Bible? No, it's not, but it is sort of like common sense to be prepared for things like that. But anyway, and you may look at this and say, well, it's very simple, but I owe too much to be able to follow this very simple budget. Well, I understand. Things happen. We do things to ourselves. And situations come up. There are all sorts of things that happen. But it is worth the time and effort to get ourselves into a budget. Whether it's this budget or any other kind of budget. And it may take us time. I'm not saying, okay, everybody go home and from tonight on, this is what you're going to follow and this is how you're going to do it. Tomorrow I'll come look at your books and see if we're not doing that. But what I'm saying is we all need to be wise with what God's given us, because we're going to answer to God for it. So we need to be wise with what God's given us. We need to live on some kind of a budget. And when we have for years not lived with a budget, it's going to take us some time and it's going to take some sacrifice to get into a budget. And it'll be hard. Absolutely. But it'll be rewarded at the end. You know what one of the greatest things is in the world? Not to owe anybody anything. That's one of the greatest things in the world. Now, most of us have no idea what that's like. But the Bible tells us that the borrower is servant to the lender. And that's true. What we have to, in a lot of ways, what we have to learn is how to make do with what we have until we can afford to buy what we need. It's what we need to learn instead of learning the art of signing up for payments. The art of signing up for payments is what usually kills us. And it will kill a marriage. It will kill a family. And what happens is, dad, mom, they're both working, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, just trying to make the minimum payments. And who's left home to take care of the kids? God gave the kids to the parents. Not to the daycare, not to anybody, any other family. And so, when we're in that case, we're not really doing what God intended for us to do, which is to raise our kids for God. So we need to have a budget so that we can be wise. Anyway, look over in Proverbs chapter 11. Here we see that a wise husband and wife will discuss every large purchase together before the decision is made to go forward with that purchase. Not sort of a, honey, look what I brought home. And only payments for 84 months. It's only $500 bi-weekly. We can afford it. I just need to get a second, third, fourth, and 25th job. It'll be fine. It'll work. You'll see. Oh, we need to talk about those things. Because you know what we do? We get all excited. We get all hot and bothered about, I need this. And we don't need it. Most of the time we don't need it. We just want it real bad. And so we get all hot and bothered about, oh, I gotta have it. And if we don't take the time to sit and talk about it, we're going to make the wrong decision. Here in Proverbs chapter 11, verse number 14, the Bible says, where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. So my wife and I, we've talked about a lot of the large purchases, like the house we rent. That costs money. The place you live costs money. You have to spend money. And so I didn't go find it, rent it, and then say, hey, I found us a place. You can see it when we move in. You see what I'm saying? And the same thing with all the vehicles that we bought. We haven't always gone together, but we've always discussed it together before we sign anything as far as buying a vehicle. And so we do that. But in some cases, it could be profitable for the husband and wife to seek counsel together outside of themselves. I'm saying beyond the husband and wife themselves before making a decision. But it needs to be done together rather than, like the husband goes to his parents, the wife goes to her parents, and then they come back and try and force the other one to do what dad, mom said we should do. That tends to be a problem, especially with those who haven't been married very long. They haven't figured out that, hey, we are a family. They still think me and dad, mom are a family. And then him and his parents are a family, or her and her parents are a family. And we just have to live together. You have to get past that because otherwise you're going to cause a lot of problems for yourself and for your family. What about allowance for the children? And now the children's ears perk up. Oh, allowance. My kids are like, what is that? Anyway, and it's true. I never gave them allowance. My wife tried to for like 5 minutes. And then, ain't worth it. But anyway, let's talk about some things about allowance, because just because we didn't do it doesn't mean that it's wrong for other people to do it. The choice to give an allowance, that's up to the parents. It's totally up to the parents. However, you need to be wise in the way that you do it. You also have to understand that as far as the 50-30-20 plan, the budget we talked about, allowance comes out of that 30%. It comes out of the wants. It's not a necessity. And if there's not money, there's no allowance. Life. Live with it. You know, that's just how it is. But anyway, there has to be a proper purpose in choosing to give an allowance as well. Just to give a child spending money is really a very poor purpose for an allowance, because in a way you're perpetuating a welfare mentality. You breathe, therefore you should have money. That's not real life. This is just not real life. And what we've talked about before is the fact that as parents, we are trying to raise adults. I don't want to raise an adult that thinks somebody else owes them a living. I want to raise adults that know how to work and provide for themselves and for their own, that God gives them. That's what I'm looking for. So anyway, giving an allowance for the purpose of teaching a child how to handle money, that's a good reason. I want to teach it. But to say that and just give them an allowance and never sit down with them and tell them how to save and how to handle money, then you're just having your own conscience is what you're doing. You're lying to yourself and everybody else saying that. And you have to have a right plan as far as the allowance goes. And here's a couple of different ideas, four different plans. There's the unconditional allowance, which consists of giving a regular amount of money without requiring the child to earn the money by doing chores. This allowance rewards the child for being a part of the family. And I figure being part of the family is reward in itself. Anyway. But again, that gives the child a sense of entitlement, which is not what we want to teach. And anyway, here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse number 10, the Bible says, even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. You see what it says? It talks about reward, but it also talks about consequences. But if you have unconditional allowance, they don't look at the allowance as a reward, and there's no consequence for them not doing anything. So it doesn't even follow the pattern of Scripture at all in that regard. So if you're giving allowance, that's not the way to do it. There's also the pay as needed allowance, and with this model, kids don't regularly receive a set amount of money, but instead ask their parents for money as they need it. And children, they haven't necessarily done any work, and so they don't learn how to save toward larger expenses under this model. What this teaches is the art of what we just talked about, the art of going into debt. I want it now. Give me the money now. I'll make payments. That's fine. I'll make payments and do that. And that's what you're teaching your children, rather than the art of saving until you have enough to get what you want. Then there's the earned money for chores allowance. And that sounds good. This is, again, the most common type of allowance. Kids are expected to do certain chores around the house in exchange for money. And it's often a set amount of money for a set list of chores that must be done each week. And under this model, the child sees the direct correlation between the work put into the chores and the money received. But for that to be effective, there has to be consequences when the chores aren't done. Oh, you forgot this week? You forgot. You know how kids are. They always forget the jobs, but they never forget the fun. Have you ever noticed that? They never forget to eat. I've noticed that with my boys. They never forget to eat. It's just some of the other things that slip their mind at times. But anyway, when you're doing this kind of allowance, you do need to do it in such a way that there are consequences if they don't follow through and do their work. There has to be. Otherwise, you're not teaching them anything at all. Then there's the hybrid allowance. And so as a contributing member of the family, each child is expected to do certain chores around the house for free. That's the way it ought to be. But if you want to do allowance, then the allowance ought to be for things beyond the norm. Okay, so, obviously I'm throwing my opinion in here with this one. That's fine. If you don't want to do it that way, I don't care. It's not going to hurt my feelings any. But I'm just telling you from my perspective, and I believe from a biblical perspective, this is, if you're going to give allowance, this is the way to do it. Because, look, your kids ought to clean their room, they ought to make their bed, they ought to pick up their toys without allowance. That's just, hey, you live, you breathe, you clean. That's just life. Then, if you want to give them allowance, then there ought to be other things for them to do. Yeah, kind of like that. And then, as they say here, then you can have some bigger things. Like, okay, now we've got, we've already taken care of garbage. We've already taken care of, I was going to say trash, but I just said that. We've already taken care of dishes. We've already taken care of cooking. We've already taken care of the lawn. Because all that should be taken, those are not big things. I mean, they're consistent things that have to be dealt with, but they're not big things. But then you have the big things, which is sometimes your fall cleanup, your spring cleanup. That takes a little more time. Especially like every spring. My dad and mom got my sister and I out to clean up after our dog after the winter. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you have no idea. If you don't have any idea, you're blessed. But there we were. And you know what Dad and Mom gave us? They didn't even give us a good job. Not a thing. We got to come in and, no, they let us wash our hands. That's what they did. You wash your hands after you're done. Anyway, but when we get to some of the bigger jobs, again, maybe you're going to put a deck on the back. Look, as your kids get older, they need to start doing things. Give them jobs to do. And they don't all have to be that kind of job. I give church jobs to my boys, different things that they do. They do a good job with those. And I appreciate it, and it saves me from having to do it. And then I can raise their allowance. I've doubled their allowance since we've lived here. I already told you I'm not giving them anything, so I can double it again. It won't hurt me. But I'm saying, as the difficulty of the task grows, then the amount of money that we are willing to offer should also grow with that. And what that does, it forces the child and the parents to discuss money. Well, I don't want to have to talk about money. You know what? You need to teach your kids about money, because that's part of life. In the life in which we live, in the world that we live in, everything we do has to do with money. It's not like the old days, where, like in Papua New Guinea, they would trade shells for goods. We don't live in those days anymore. It's dollars and cents, not pennies, but cents. And so we have to teach our children how to live in that world. How do we do that? This is one way of doing it. Because you force them to actually think about money and think about the value of money. It gives you an opportunity to teach about that, because they'll need it. Again, you have young people who've been raised in a home where they were never taught about money, and they get out, and you know what the bank does. As soon as they find out there's this young person that just got out on their own, what do? You've been pre-approved for everything. Everything. It doesn't matter what it is. But you've been pre-approved for everything, and you can be in debt beyond your wildest dreams before you hit your 21st birthday. So we need to teach these boundaries in the home. And if we do that through allowance, fine. If we do it another way, also fine. But we need to teach that, and we need to pass that on, rather than, well, I had to learn the hard way, so let them learn that way. Why would we do that to our kids? Really? Did you ever walk out in front of a car and get run over? Why? Because your parents taught you better. I would hope. We teach our kids not to walk out in front of vehicles, and we ought to. Why wouldn't we do this? Because here, at least, they walk out in front of the car's fault. Not so much in the U.S. You walk out in front of a car and get hit, by and large, it's your fault. It's different. It is. A pedestrian, that's a distinct animal in the U.S. because of that. But what I'm saying is, if we're willing to teach our children these sort of practical things about how not to walk out in the road and get killed, why wouldn't we teach them practical things about how not to blow your money and how not to ruin your life when you're just getting started? I mean, sort of like, oh, I don't have money for it, but I'll go down to the rent-to-own. Any of you ever get caught in the rent-to-own craze? I worked for a rent-to-own at one time. I told you I worked almost everywhere. I worked for a rent-to-own one time, and they told us for appliances, if somebody paid out the whole contract, for appliances, they paid 3 times. So your fridge that's what, $800? You pay $2,400 by the end of that contract. For electronics, computers, stereos, etc., you pay 4 times. Oh, but it's just a little bit every week or every month. It's so easy. We need to teach our children, save your money. If you save your money, it'll go farther. It will. Because you know what? If you're paying back, either in a rent-to-own or whether it's on a credit card or any other kind of loan, you're always going to pay more because of interest and other fees and whatnot. So we need to be wise parents to teach our children. And you say, well, I haven't been the wisest. Then, number one, you need to clean up house, your own financial house. You do need to do that. But you also need to teach your children regardless of whether you've done the right thing or not. Sort of like people say, well, I tried drugs, so I can't talk to my kids about drugs. Are you kidding? That's dumb. To me, it's like, I tried it. I know how dumb it is. You shouldn't do it. That makes a whole lot more sense. And it's the same thing with money. Your kid says, well, Dad, Mom, you did this. Yeah. That's why we're trying to tell you not to. We've learned that this is not the way to do it. And so that's what we need to do as parents. We need to teach our children how to take care of their money. We need to teach them how to take care of themselves spiritually and how to take care of themselves financially. Let's stand together with our heads bowed and eyes closed.